Good afternoon, everyone. I have a book for you to review this afternoon that I don't think in a subject I don't think I talk too much about, at least as far as reviews are concerned. And I'll just go and show you the title and the subtitle of the book, and that sort of gives it all away. It's called Visual Shock, A History of Art Controversies in American Culture by Michael Kammen. This book purports to be nothing less than a history of art controversies in American culture. Its scope is really, really big, dating all the way back to the beginning of the 19th century, all the way up through the construction of the Washington Monument, and coming up through things within living history or living memory, like the more recent contretemps over people like Robert Mapplethorpe and Andres Serrano. If you're not familiar with Andres Serrano, he's the artist responsible for Piss Christ. The chapters are organized topically and cover a lot of the ground that you would expect such a comprehensive history to deal with. The introduction of modern art into the United States, public sculpture, murals, the politicization of art and art funding, and even changing aspects in American museology, or how museums are shaped and formed and what they exhibit and all of that good stuff. One of the problems with the book is that whole libraries have been written about just any one of these subjects. Reading Kamen's book, I was reminded of a distinction that will be pretty familiar to computer scientists, the distinction between data and information. Data is this sort of raw, unprocessed, unfiltered stuff, and if some serious work isn't done on it, it's pretty useless. Information, on the other hand, has had some sort of heuristic applied to it in such a way that it can now communicate something meaningful and something important. Unfortunately, this book struck me as all data and almost no information. The sheer number of names, projects, commissions, provincial politicians, and kvetching letters to the editor that the reader encounters is impressive enough. And you get these sort of quick, superficial accounts of Karen Finley, Judy Chicago's famous piece, The Dinner Party, Chris Ofili, I believe he's a Nigerian artist who works in elephant dung. The huge metal pieces constructed by Richard Serra, the bombastic denunciations against modern art by the likes of McCarthyist Congressman George Dondero, the protest art of the 60s and 70s, the palpable drive for museums to put on more and more extreme exhibits, even though they're often sacrificing the quality of the art that's shown, all for the sole purpose of pulling in more money. All of that is talked about. And as I said earlier, all of it has had whole shelves of books. Each one of those individual topics has had whole shelves of books dedicated to it. But he covers many of these in just a few pages, which is barely enough to introduce the reader to some of the pieces and the ideas and the artists being considered, before he moves on to something else that catches his attention. Even given Kamen's distracting lack of narrative drive and insistence on including everything under the sun, there are some reoccurring themes and questions that do pop up in the book. Questions like, when should taxpayer dollars be expended on art, and when shouldn't they be? Should nudity or the ability to offend a section of the viewing public have any relevance to questions like this? Kamen, to his credit, does include some interesting polling of the general public on these questions, but as with many of the other things in the book, he covers them very quickly and breathlessly in a few sentences and then moves on to something else. He also discusses several commissions during the Great Depression and some of the factors that determined how the public reacted to those commissions, especially ones that were painted in for whatever reason, post offices. And I thought this was actually one of the most interesting and well-covered parts of the book. But at the end, one is left with the underwhelming and unsurprising conclusion that most of the public is at best befuddled and at worst disgusted by modern art. However, instead of building critically on that observation, or going one step beyond what any relatively informed reader could have already told you, he leaves it there. The level of analysis or integrative thought beyond the whole project, or in the whole project, is pretty sorely lacking, which goes back to what I said about data and information earlier. He has all of this stuff, but there's just been no sieve there which sort of filters it in a meaningful way. Writing a book like this consists just as much in knowing about what you're not going to include as knowing what you are going to include, and I don't think he knows the difference. On a more prosaic note, in earlier chapters, pictures are included when necessary. For those of you who can't visually conjure pieces of art like Hiram Powers' The Greek Slave from memory, and I'm sure some of you are out there. However, Kammen also refers to works of several names I mentioned above and includes absolutely no pictures. I, for example, recognize Chris O'Feely's name, but I can't visually recall any of his art. The same thing for Karen Finley. I'm pretty lucky to do it with Robert Mapplethorpe because his name is just a little bit more popular, but he does talk about some of these pieces and doesn't include pictures of them. And then he'll include a picture of the Washington Monument, which, well, we all know what the Washington Monument looks like. So this seemed like a pretty bad idea. Maybe he couldn't get the relevant artist or museum's permission, perhaps, but this is, I thought, too sizable of an oversight in a book that deals so explicitly with art and with artists, especially much of which the reader may have never visually encountered before. For this reason, and for others that I talked about earlier, this may be best to completely overlook unless you're just interested in the most general, most cursory discussions of the topic. And even then, I'm probably sure you can find something better than this book. Visual Shock, A History of Art Controversies in American Culture by Michael Kammen.